Well, up next
thanks. Go ahead.
is a terrific panel. We are here to talk about privacy, and we have legitimately some of the world experts who have been trying to figure out how privacy how crypto can help actually enable better privacy. Here to lead the conversation is Corey Petty from Status, but I think we're going to have an amazing conversation with people here from Zcash and Orchid, et cetera. So, Corey, I'll let you take it from here.
Yeah. Privacy is clearly important, especially in the decentralized space, as we try to attempt to minimize the gap between those with power and those with not, and how much influence they have, how much the top have influence on the bottom. I've tried to put together a panel to talk about some of the implications of privacy, as more often than not, people talk about how much it's needed, but those of us who are trying to implement it in a myriad of ways have run into difficulties, both with our users and in the technology itself. So today we have a nice panel. So I'm Corey. I'm the CSO of Status. I'm also a founder and host of both the Bitcoin podcast and Hashing It Out. And if we can bring our panel in, I can give them a quick moment and introduce them. If you want to know more about me, look me up. I'm everywhere. We have Dr. Stephen Waterhouse. So why don't you give a quick 1-minute introduction as to kind of who you are? So I want to spend most of the time on content.
Yeah, sure. Can you guys hear me okay?
Yep.
Okay, great. Hi. Stephen Waterhouse, aka Seven, co-founder and CEO of Orchid Labs. We're building privacy technology on Ethereum, and our first product is a decentralized VPN. Previously, I was co-founder and CTO and partner at Pantera Capital, and then before that, many different careers in building startups.
Justin Holmes, how about you?
Hello, my name, as you say, is Justin Holmes. I'm at Nucypher. I'm the ranking unlicensed plumber over there, and I occasionally play some music.
That's quite a few good talks, and I always appreciate the flair of music in these generally kind of boring talks about cryptography and privacy. So we have a few more. They may join us later on down the line, but we can go ahead and get started. And I'll direct kind of the first question to you, Justin, but feel free to jump in, Stephen, if you'd like to. And sure. I guess the first concept I'd like is like, as we keep building better and better privacy technology, it's getting to the point where it's inevitable. But our users are going to have much more power in their hands to do the things they'd like to do without being beholden to those who'd like to surveil them. How does that suck? What's bad about that?
I'm glad that you started there, because I think that we take it for granted that the advances in privacy technology, and specifically cryptographic privacy technology, are going to be viewed with open arms and optimism. And I think that that's often not the case, largely because the appearance is, and this is quite reasonable, that privacy appears as an abating agent in the flow of data from users, from minds, to the corpus of human knowledge. In other words, there is a widespread belief that we're moving toward a society where all of human knowledge will, be wonderfully available for future generations. And if it weren't for those privacy folks, we'd have a more clear picture of who humans are. And I think this is distinctly wrong-headed, chiefly because it ignores what I regard as the main role of privacy, which is to preclude the self-censorship that comes sometimes in the early days of a good idea, that prevent that idea from making its way to wider and wider circles of society. So I think that the weakness is partly in the way that it's sold, and partly in the way that the technologies are used. But by and large, I think that it's important for us to make inroads into communities with a reminder that, in fact, the self-censorship that comes from fear in an absence of privacy is a big part of what keeps some of the best ideas from reaching their full potential.
I want to welcome Ying to the panel. You can kind of jump in after we kind of maybe start the next section or next question. But Stephen, do you have anything to say about that?
Yeah, it's sort of an interesting counterpoint to this assumption, as you said, that everything gets better if we're more private. I think as Albert from Union Square Ventures gave an interesting talk at Blockstack many years ago in Berlin. And he gave this counterpoint where he said that we actually need radically less privacy as science and technology improves, because what we should be scared of is the 15-year-old in the basement building the next bioweapon by mistake, or perhaps on purpose, and releasing it out to the world. And so his sort of amusing counterpoint, which was said somewhat in jest, but was something to kind of like a thought experiment to think about, is, well, maybe we should be surveilling people more, not less. I disagree with that, but it is kind of a thought experiment to think, what are the boundaries, and how should we separate the lines between mass surveillance and targeted surveillance, and what is the role of law enforcement in that kind of world where radically improved privacy is possible. I mean, I'll take a little bit of issue with your initial statement, which is that I think that when it comes to targeted surveillance of individual, the kind of tools and the kind of exploits that can be gained over your devices are significant, and more significant than we even realize. So certainly tools like the ones we're building, which attempt to prevent mass surveillance, are helpful. We hope we're helpful, but the sort of targeted surveillance of an individual by an agency is still very powerful and probably hard to resist at this point.
I can agree with that kind of perspective. Ying, the question was, like, privacy is getting better. It's inevitable. We're giving more power to the users to disclose themselves the way they'd like to with the platforms that they use. But what sucks about that?
Okay. Hi, my name is Tong. That is my first name. What? Well, that's a good question. Yeah, you can come back to me. Let me think about that.
Yeah, sure. You can always come back on that one. I can move to kind of a similar type topic, and that is we as developers have to build this, and we have to build it for what we think are our users. But in the process of introducing more and more privacy for our users, we are relinquishing a lot of the power we have to understand who our users are and what they're doing, so that we can maybe make decisions on behalf of them based on the data they give us in the process of using our technology. So as we start to remove our ability to surveil is a correct word, but it's maybe a negative connotation. As we remove our ability to understand our users through their behavior, like, how do we make decisions for them? And I'll direct that to whoever would like to pick it up.
I guess the kind of the thinking process here is the kind of the business models of the internet are built around being able to track people and give them the things that we think they want, and in many cases they do, whether they're on the platform that they're on or whether just a more general broad internet. So yeah, I do think it's a challenge. It does disrupt the business models and could even disrupt significantly the actual ability to personalize things. I think that with careful design and use of things like zero knowledge proofs, there's ways to disclose information that doesn't require the disclosure of everything about you in some kind of one massive swoop, right? The question is whether or not they kind of come back a lot of this question a lot as to, so how do we motivate people to want that? Like, they already have something that works. Like this idea that, like, oh, let's build a decentralized social network and everyone's going to just want it. It's like, well, it turns out they just really don't care. They just want the thing that works. So there needs to be something more compelling, I think. And that's a separate conversation. Yeah, I think that there are ways to do it, but it's complicated.
Yeah, I think it's a great question about how do we know what our users' needs are and how do our users communicate them to us. I've joined the Zcash community for maybe a year or so, and I see that community engagement through GitHub, through public forums, through the Discord. They're still really active channels, and there's a lot of lively debate and discussion, and people do bring up features and issues that they're interested in. So for example, I think in the horizon for the Zcash protocol is transparent Zcash extensions, which extend the functionality of Bitcoin script and allow people to basically work with more general preconditions for their transactions. And a project called BUIDLathon is building zero-knowledge payment channels using this extension. So that's, for instance, one feature request that came out of community engagement. And then there are other apps like Zbay, for example, which is private messaging using the memo field of Zcash. And yeah, like basically keeping in touch with the community and making the decision to engage is just good UX and it's just good project management, like regardless of whether this is a privacy focused project or not.
But I think, Corey, the point that maybe you were starting to make was that if the projects are sufficiently private, then we won't even know what or who they are and thus what or who the needs are. Is that kind of where you were saying?
Yep, that's a good part of it. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think like you have to understand. I'm sure this comes as no surprise to other layer 2 people who are engaged in layer 2 engineering that right now that's not a practical problem. Right now we're still trying to find the sweet spot to even inspire the beginnings of user engagement. We probably have, I would think, forecast another at least year or year and a half of things being such that a lot of our user engagement is happening at hackathons and in places where people are wanting to be seen. But at a deeper level, your question is profound and wonderful. What do we do when if success means that we can't know very much about our users, and I think that is one of the things that it means, then what do we do? And I think that the answer to that, at least mostly, is that we look at society and understand if our project can be used, is being used, and we think about it being used to help existing marginalized groups, marginalized communities, then probably we're doing the right thing, and probably more affluent communities will find ways to use it also. The idea that people need to be, which Seven, this is a good point, and we think about it all the time, of course, people are sort of insufficiently motivated to seek out these features like a private social network. But I think that's also because we are not really ready as a society yet. Our technological infrastructure hasn't matured yet to keep track of the really serious secrets that people have. If people many people in the United States have essentially a Boolean flag on their personality called undocumented. And if that's true, they can be arbitrarily, capriciously hauled off and put in a cage. That's a completely unacceptable situation. And I think that if we're building privacy technology that allows a group with such an incredibly marginalizing feature to use it successfully, then that's a good sign. Even if we don't necessarily know and can't know the particulars of how it's being used, it being used in contexts like that, I think, is a strong signal that it's a useful technology and will be useful to many strata of society.
I can agree with that. Kind of the concept of understanding that it is being used in conjunction with Ying Tong's concept of having active engagement outside of the use to get feature requests and actively asking people for what they want helps us understand better products to build.
Heck yeah, and I do want to underscore Seven's point about the prospect of using some kind of zero knowledge, the accoutrements of zero knowledge in order to facilitate engagement support is actually a wonderful point.
I 100% agree. In fact, most of the people in here have experience with zero knowledge proof, at least in terms of this panel. Barry, why don't you give yourself a quick introduction and add anything to that if you'd like to.
Hey friends, yeah, so I'm Barry. I do a lot of work with privacy and scalability using CKPs, fraud proofs, and other things. I've also been doing some fun mechanism design stuff more recently, which is also pretty interesting. So just to answer the question, the last one that you asked. So the last one you asked is so if we have this utopia or this future dystopia, whatever, where everything is very, very private, we won't know what users want us to build or what they need. And I think I kind of land a bit with Tong on this, that don't worry, people will tell you. People are very upfront about what they want from their things that they're using. But the difficult and the challenging thing is to find out what they really mean when they say what they want. That some people will say, oh, I want this and this, but that's not necessarily what they really want. For example, Tornado Cash is this thing built on Ethereum that's really successful. And it's basically a kind of a mixer. You put your coin in, you can withdraw it, and there's no way to connect the deposit to the withdrawal. So this is really successful, and a lot of people. Yeah, sorry, I didn't really know where I'm going with that. I think my point was something along the lines of
I'm a big fan of what's happening with Tornado Cash too.
Yeah, it's pretty cool.
I think bringing up Tornado Cash is actually very interesting. I think the interesting aspect there, which I've been looking at, is the concept of this anonymity liquidity mining, which they added, and the challenge with a mixer, right? Is how do you get enough nodes in the mixnet? And it was very interesting. They sort of essentially added in DeFi incentives to an anonymity mixer. And again, we're kind of tangential here, but I thought it was a really fascinating thing that you've been looking at really carefully recently.
Yeah, so I'm not really convinced about the anonymity incentives. I have a link about a post where I talk about it, but which
cool.
I shared in the chat. So basically, the post says that these things have already been tried. We already had these kind of incentives, though they weren't really as big as they are with Tornado Cash in Zcash. Zcash used to force miners to mine into the private pool, but all of this mining was actually removed from the anonymity set, because it turns out that the miners would just instantly withdraw their funds to the same address in the transparent pool as soon as they had been earned. So you were able to sort of gather together all of these people and remove them. And I think that the Tornado Cash liquidity anonymity mining is an interesting experiment, but I think that we really have to be careful about the I think it's an interesting experiment, and I'm kind of waiting for some deeper analysis about how this affects the anonymity set.
It actually springboards beautifully into something else that I wanted to cover. You've both already basically brought up topics that I wanted to cover. One being Seven's mentioned that users don't care. We can get back into that in a moment. But to continue this conversation, in the process of implementing privacy in Web3 technology, you have this consequence that information tends to stick around for a really long time. And it's very well structured. And so you built this corpus of beautifully structured data to mine. And as you continue to use these products, regardless of the level of privacy, you're releasing more and more information about yourself. And so you have this weird concept that as you use these products more and more and more, the ability to create or disclose more and more information about yourself, specifically on previously private aspects about yourself, and maybe de-anonymize yourself in some ways, gets more and more prevalent. How do you combat that or think about that when you're adding features to something that gathers all of this data into a single place or a few places that interact with each other? I'll let anyone who'd like to pick that up.
I'll take a crack at it. One of the ways that at Nucypher that that we address that issue is by separating the cryptological actors such that the actor who decides who gets access to the resource, which is Alice, is not the same actor as the actor who encrypts data for the resource. We call that one Enrico. And it's one of the big advantages of threshold proxy re-encryption. And when we sort of got our head wrapped around that, it was kind of exciting because we realized that Alice, the authority of the policy, can sort of go to sleep or delete her private keys. But I don't know. I tend to think questions like that. I tend to think solid engineering, and we need to just, a big thing is we need to continue to attract our usership through solid engineering that's easy to understand. I mean, it's an ongoing challenge, but I think it's the one, that we all signed up for and we're having fun rising to.
Yeah, I think Nucypher has a really cool, it potentially has a really cool UX. Like anyone who wants access to that data can just request that it be re-encrypted to their key, right?
That is one possible. That's one possible scheme. Alice, the original authority of the policy, needs to be online. Needs to use her private material in order to grant that access. So in the scenario you're describing, you'd have some kind of an Alice oracle.
Okay.
Any other thoughts on the matter? It's something I've been worried about because we add more and more features that allow you to give yourself options to disclose yourself more about yourself. And in a model like Ethereum, that's account-based, it's all kind of around a single entity. So you may enter into the ecosystem with a lot of anonymity, but as you use more and more services, you build up a much, much larger corpus of information about yourself, which means that you remove what you previously thought was anonymous about yourself in the process of using features. Like, what do we do about that? Because can privacy tech mitigate that? And if so, how and when does it come about?
So like there's sometimes when it just can't do anything. For example, if you live in like a very low population time zone, for example, I think Greenland has like very few people in that same time zone, and you do a lot of stuff during the business hours of this place, then is this the kind of thing you're getting at, that there's like, when I'm making my transactions, I always make them at 5 p.m. Greenland time, and there's a very small set of people doing this, and you're able to kind of locate me because this is the thing I'm doing repetitively. Is this kind of what you're getting at?
Kind of, but it's more like
or like timing attacks.
Or like even just say, for instance, I have used an account to do activity. I put funds through a mixer, and that's recorded on the blockchain. And at some point in time, I decided to use the new ENS feature and get a name attached to that address. The concept of me having privacy attached to the funds that I moved into a mixer is now gone, because that's recorded on the blockchain and tied with my ENS name if I forgot to not use the same account.
Yeah. So you're like, so this is okay. So that's an interesting point, right? Because you have these. Yeah, it's really difficult to. Okay, so we can make the best privacy technology in the world, but the users have to use it well. Like one of the big problems that people make when they're using Zcash or they're using something else, some other privacy coin, is to deposit like 1.156 Ether into the pool, and then they do some stuff and they withdraw later 1.56 to Ether from the privacy pool, and like. That's just, it's obvious that they are the person who deposited because they were the person who withdrew because they were the only person who deposited. So there's like this whole difficult like education problems that you need to solve in order to kind of complement these private systems, which is non-trivial. It's
Well, to go off of that, you mentioned that it's an educational problem, which it very much is. We have to, as we relinquish power as people building products to the users, we have to educate them so that they can make the best decision in the context that they would like, in the context they're presented with the information they have. And so as developers, we kind of have to not only make our user interfaces intuitive so they can make those decisions, but educate them about the things they should care about, because more often than not, they're not aware of it. And with privacy-related features, that includes making sure that they understand the disclosures they're making whenever they're making them. What are we doing in that realm? How do we think about that? Especially as Seven mentioned, users don't care until it's usually too late.
Well, that education is a two-way street. We need to be listening about what people don't want to disclose and why, and with a careful ear and careful commits and code reviews, ensure that the things that those things are evident. When that exposure is evident. The scenario that you painted with a mixer and a ENS domain is a really solid one, and I think, like, as you sort of talked yourself through it, it's pretty obvious that those technologies, if indeed we want privacy related to ENS domains, that there's a re-engineering component that needs to be done. I am interested in hearing the sensitivities there and about exactly how and why and when. What information would we even want to be available, and when, during the acquisition of an ENS domain is sort of itself an interesting privacy question. Privacy, of course, has forever, been contrasted with public. Public and private have been essentially contrasted with one another. Of course, they both are Latin words, right? This is a 1,000-year-old notion of things working together, and obviously, an ENS domain is by its nature a public entity. It's something that I'm going to type into my browser or to my terminal. And so, what is the private role there? These are good questions, and the oil and water of public and private are sort of endemic to the conversation at this point, which is a good sign. But I don't know. I know it's an extremely roundabout way of answering your question, I think, because there's no terrific answer for it today, except to say that these are all issues that belong in a bug tracker somewhere.
Anyone else? I think 7 is frozen, or is that just me, or is he frozen in thought? I'm going to assume frozen in thought because he hasn't moved yet. So, kind of like I mentioned, like in the beginning, like, zero knowledge proofs and the development of applied cryptography is growing and growing and growing to the point where, like, we're getting to an area where we can make systems of rules that allow you to work within the system without disclosing anything about yourself. What does that mean for, like, I guess the best way to answer this is, like, any tool can be used for good or evil, and it's up to, like, the developer to make a decision based on the potential consequences of whether or not to implement that thing, and they have to think about that stuff. In the event that everything is private, is it overwhelmingly good or overwhelmingly bad? Because it's the potential for these things isn't necessarily equal. How do we weigh what can be done with the technology we're building with, like, what we want people to do with it?
I think if you just look at, like, kind of some of the exploits in DeFi that are happening and the speed at which these things happen, the kind of so there's some of these articles about the dark forest and mempools and so on, is that I think it's pretty naive of us to hope that by some kind of good intention of a developer, things are going to work out okay. I think that there's some really amazing technology being developed. And a comment I've made for many years now is, just because we have blockchains and just because they're going to be private doesn't necessarily mean it's going to be good. It's a lot of, like, dark architectures you can build of, like, very centralized control. centralized digital bank currencies and so on that will have all sorts of great privacy tech in there, and it'll seem like they're decentralized, but they really will be more about controlling you than they will about giving you freedom. So I think that a lot of the thinking we have in the space is that the technology will create the society, and I think we need to make sure that we don't take that too far and remember that societies create society, and then ideally they use technology to create better societies. But if we just assume that the technology is going to take over and create some wonderful society for us, and we don't need to get involved in that, we may miss something really important.
Yeah, brilliant, man. I feel like I'm kind of dominating the conversation here. I'd like to invite the others to step in if they want. But failing any unmutes happening, I don't know. Okay, so I'll play the naive role that you described for a moment. And that's not to say that I disagree with you. I don't, but I also think that it's helpful to look at the longitudinal positioning of technology and society and find the cases for optimism. And I think there are many of them. This gathering that we've had here, ETHDenver generally, is filled with just, there's obviously an attractor of some kind of curvature of the space-time of wisdom and knowledge that is bringing a lot of good ideas here. And I think that what tends to happen is, at least for me, and I think this is probably a widespread feeling, is that when we think those dark thoughts, like you were, elucidating there about the prospects for information deprival being used to control us, what's really happening there, I think, is a muddying of the waters about what we're really talking about. So if the title of the panel is "The Thing with Privacy Is," then I think we need to identify that the thing with privacy is that it is a micro institution of the self and of the body and of the user. And when we start to see entities that are beholden to the public, when we start to see the commons filled with notions that you can't record that or see that or hear that or think that, that's not actually privacy. That's a different thing. That's secrecy for secrecy's sake, or secrecy for the sake of secret police. And the thing about privacy is that it sort of has this walled off notion, as I was saying last time, in contrast to the publicus. And so it's not to say that I would say, we could leave it to the developers, and as long as we develop good technology, that it will develop society. I agree with you that societies develop society, but I also think that we are best positioned to try the best we can to lift each other up with a degree of optimism. I mean, we haven't even really talked about the progress of the last year in development of our code bases. Yours and mine obviously have gone through leaps and bounds, and the enthusiasm over the deployment of novel cryptographic primitives in a decentralized way, I think, I don't know, you can't necessarily call it new and novel, but it's a cause for optimism, I think, and it's okay to operate with that optimism as long as we also are thinking critically about what we're developing and why.
Yeah, I agree. It's good to be optimistic too, and I am.
I agree with that. And I think that's a great kind of parting thought, but I'd like to allow others to kind of give a quick parting thought to the audience as we wrap this up. Ying, Tong, do you have anything to kind of reflect on, or have our audience reflect on?
Yeah, I mean, to end on a high note, there's a lot to be optimistic about, and what I'm excited for is more universal snarks, or like, for instance, Plonk is being widely used by lots of projects, including Zcash, and basically that gets rid of the trusted setup, which was a big part of many in production protocols, and perhaps a source of uncertainty for some. And I think we're seeing advancements in usability, scalability of privacy tech and of privacy protocols. So I'm excited for this technology to become more and more usable and scalable in the coming years.
Very much agree. Barry, do you have any parting thoughts for us?
Yes, I do. I think that this is a really exciting time to build new things. One of the things I'm really excited about seeing is private social media. So there's some approaches to this using kind of snark-based constructions where you get like reputation based upon the posts you make, and you can give other people reputation, in a private way. So I have some other posts about this, which I'm going to share. I hope that gets transferred somewhere so that everyone can see it. But yeah, it'd be exciting to see people working on this weekend. It'll be cool to. I'm excited to see the projects that come out of ETHDenver. I was there last year, and there was a bunch of cool stuff that came out, and I'm just very excited to see more. So thank you. Thanks, Corey.
Of course. Seven, do you have anything to wrap up with?
I guess I'm just really excited to see all the energy that goes into the space, whether it's in privacy focused things or non-privacy focused. I think that I've been in this space since 2013, and it just gets more and more interesting every year, whether it's a bull market or a bear market, or we're not quite sure what kind of market it is. It's wild, and I feel just this, like listening to Justin and Ying, Tong and Barry and you, Corey, just this. It's kind of like the sense of kinship amongst people when we're all focused on this stuff. And I think that's really powerful. And so I agree with Justin. We have a lot to be optimistic for, because I think there's some really good people on this stuff. So that's what I'm into.
Thank you all for joining me. I appreciate it. And I really enjoyed this conversation.
Wonderful to be in y'all's company. Ying, Tong, I don't think we've ever met in person, but maybe next year at ETHDenver. The rest of you all, of course, we've met in person.
In person? We're going to do in-person things again?
Is
that even a thing?
It's so weird. I've heard of that.
Thank you so much, Corey.
Yep. It has been a really long time, since we've all seen each other. Thank you so much, Corey, for hosting that. That was a brilliant discussion. I think we just learned that privacy seems pretty simple, but it's really, really, really complex. Glad we have some brilliant minds on it.